The possibility that non-human intelligences have visited our planet, and even copulated with primitive human beings, is found in many of the ancient cultural and religious records of our civilization. There are historical records that reveal, in addition, that these intelligences were reptiles in their nature or, at least, have been represented throughout human history as reptilian beings. From the serpent Nahash, in the Garden of Eden, to Atum, the Egyptian serpent man, or Quetzalcoatl, the serpent god of the Mayans, to the double helix serpent of Enki or Ea in ancient Sumerian literature, the serpent has been the omnipresent link between humans and the gods of all cultures. Archaeologists and explorers discovered in 1951, a library with more than 22,000 ancient tablets in what is now Iraq. These tablets contain what we know to be the earliest writings of the Earth and date back to about 6,000 years ago when this region of the Earth was known as Mesopotamia, Sumer, and Babylon. On the tablets, a story is told that is also reflected in the book of Genesis of the Bible. The tablets tell the story of a great flood that changed the face of the earth and its inhabitants, and tells the construction of a tower and the creation of the spoken word. What in the Bible is related as the Tower of Babel and the Great Flood. On the tablets and scrolls found there was included a star map of what appears to be our Sun and its planets, since the parchment also includes detailed descriptions of our solar system that corresponds to what we know of it today. The funny thing is that this map includes a planet, or spacecraft, that orbits between Mars and Jupiter that they call Nibiru. According to the texts found, Nibiru entered our solar system and collided with the planet Tiamat. The remains of Tiamat became Eridu, which is the Earth as we know it today, and the rest left over from the explosion became the asteroid belt. Nibiru took an orbit around our Sun that took 3,600 years to pass between Mars and Jupiter. In recent years and based on patterns of our solar system, some astronomers have been looking for a planet with this same orbit, which led to the discovery of the planet Pluto. The search for Nibiru continues. According to the found texts, this detailed information was given by the Anunnaki and they are described as a race of reptilian gods who came to Earth. It is written that they came to extract gold and other elements to use them to protect the atmosphere of their planet. This theory of reptilian gods of the heavens creating man is not at all unusual, and we can find traces of reptilian history in most regions of our planet. In Japan, the emperors claim to descend from dragon gods who came from heaven. Australian Aborigines teach about a reptilian race that lives under the earth and rules over men. They believe they are descended from a race of human dragons. In China, they believe that serpent queen Nu Kua interbred with men. In India, these reptilian gods, the Nagas, are called and claim that they planted their royal families. In Eastern countries, there are traces of a serpent race that created man. In the book of Genesis speaks about giants that came from the heavens to reproduce with the daughters of man, they were called the Nephilim. In Africa they are called Chitori, children of the serpent, and the kings of Africa claimed that they descended from serpent gods that came from heaven. The Mayans spoke that their ancestors were snake people, and the Aztecs said they were created by a female snake. The American Hopi Indians believed that the gods of heaven came down to reproduce with their wives, and referred to them as their snake brothers. Reptilians live in long underground tunnels and can inhabit other dimensions. The reptilians have constituted the group of the Illuminati, beings of human aspect but under the orders of the reptilians who follow very specific political agendas to perpetuate themselves in power and control the world through media manipulation, genetics and the search for a government-centralized world. The Illuminati would have as mission the establishment of a new world order. Is there a possibility that we may be or that we have always been enslaved by these leaders?
Tonight we're going to tell you an incredible story. Mankind's creation by extraordinary species that occupied the planet 450,000 years ago. It's the special work of Marshall Clarkfeld. It's called Adam the Missing Link. And we'll be back with Marshall in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Now, he's got a varied career. He's been in politics. He has worked for some heavy hitters. He's worked in the New Hampshire presidential primary election in 1976. But in spite of all that excitement, the lingering questions about man's origins that Marshall Clarfeld pursued while an undergraduate at Caltech still haunted him. He completed his book, Adam the Missing Link, which truly does blow the lid off the closely held package of historical and scientific facts proving that the human race was created by alien genetic engineering technology a long time ago. Here he is, Marshall Clarfeld, back on Coast to Coast. Marshall, how are you?
Fine, George. Good to be with you again.
Me too. I'm looking forward to this. Incredible. I mean, every time I read this information about this and the theories, your theories, and it's similar to Zecharia Sitchin's somewhat, just fascinating. Tell me a little bit more about your background, Marshall.
Okay, well, like you indicated, I went to Caltech, and it was kind of an exciting time, and I entered as a freshman in 1947, George, believe it or not, and that's when Roswell happened.
That's right.
That was an exciting thing. I mean, the UFO came into our language in a big way because of the events at Roswell in 1947. So I became very excited about that. I spent 4 years there in Pasadena, graduated as a mechanical engineer, and went right into industry with my industrial career. But during that period, George, I was blessed with a couple of professors I had at Caltech. One was Richard Feynman in physics, and the other was Linus Pauling in chemistry. So being curious as to what these great minds, you might say, and I'm a young kid at the time, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to know, I asked Feynman, did he believe in UFOs? You know, this is the newest thing happening around Pasadena, and here's my physics guy. He hadn't got his Nobel Prize yet, but he still was a very bright gentleman. And I said, Dr. Feynman, do you believe in UFOs? And he gave me the most interesting answer probably of my lifetime, which I quoted and put in my book, and I can tell you if you're interested exactly what he said.
Absolutely.
Well, okay. He said, Clarfeld, he says, I believe in the law of probability. He says there are over 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy, and there's over 100 billion galaxies in the universe. He says the law of probability tells me that there are 10,000 solar systems just like ours, and we're the youngest because our star is, only 4.5 billion years old. He says, now, if any of those civilizations of that 10,000 survived their space age, they could have visited us. Yes, I believe in UFOs. Well, at that time, I was, young and kind of brazen, and I said, okay, that's a good answer. I'll remember it, and I did. And now that I look back on it, George, what he said was profound. I mean, 10,000 systems just like ours.
Absolutely. At least.
And he said that, the secret was to survive your space age, which means that you had atomic weapons and you had rockets. And if you didn't blow yourself off the planet that you occupied, you're going to become space travelers, which is like that's where we are right now. We're on the threshold of our space age, and we haven't blown ourselves up yet. So one day we're going to go out into space and visit other solar systems, just as we were visited according to the translations of the cuneiform tablets that are given to us from the Sumerian civilization. They were here 450,000 years ago, just like you said in your introduction. And the evidence, what I tried to do in my book, George, was to prove to myself, because I'm a tire kicker, that the Zecharia Sitchin's thesis was correct.
Does this negate the belief of God?
No, they had a God. You see,
absolutely.
It comes out that in fact, they had a very interesting name for their God. They called him the creator of all, which I think is a magnificent description.
Even though whatever was genetically altered on this planet to become us, they thought that these ETs were also gods, did they not? Yes.
You see, there's a kind of a interesting thing that happens when an advanced culture meets a primitive culture. The primitives look at the advanced as gods because they can't believe their technology and all the stuff that they have. And how they deal with them is usually they subjugate them, they enslave them, which is, you look at the Spanish conquistadors going over to the Incas, that's exactly what happened. And in that repetition of the history of advanced and primitive, you have a pattern that gives us what we see that I see in the cuneiform tablets. In other words, there's a story that I have also in my book. It's called Gilgamesh. And that story was a nice story. It's, the first story on the planet. Everybody looks at it and sees different things in it. What I saw in it was a transfer of information, about cloning, because the story talks about the king and his Enkidu, which is a duplicate of him, which they made. And then there's the space part of it where they fly around from the earth up into whatever they go, the heavens. And they also have weapons. They have they call the Bull of Heaven. Do you remember the Bull of Heaven, George?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, that could be it could be a laser. When the bull snorted, there was a flame that came out of his mouth. Right?
Yeah.
And if you look at it, like it blew trenches in the city of Uruk, that's a laser. So I look for things like that when I tried to put together the physical stuff here on the planet that made sense, that made this story of we are a genetically engineered species. And when people ask me that question, well, what are you talking about? I said, well, look at it this way. Before there were Homo sapiens, that's us, there was a species called Homo erectus. And Homo erectus was evolving, as Darwin said everything did, for 1,800,000 years.
And they may have evolved eventually into us in time, I guess.
Right. That's right, but they got extinct. What happened to them is they went bye-bye. But what I look at is, well, how far did they get technically? What was their technology? Well, they had spears, wooden throwing things. They made stone things. But even with those primitive tools, they never advanced beyond that level, and they also couldn't really speak. They didn't have what we call vocal equipment in their larynx to be able to communicate. So that's 1,800,000 years of evolution gets to this level of technology. Now here, we appear on this planet 250,000 years ago, which is a very short time.
Short time, very short in the scheme of things.
Yeah, and we're walking on the moon.
Yeah.
I mean, give me a break. This is a technological achievement which is beyond anything evolution ever produced. Now, how'd that happen? That's the thing, How did we get so smart, and how did we advance so fast? And where is the link between us and Homo erectus?
And we're getting smarter, Marshall.
You're right.
Overall, not all of us, but
you're smarter than me, so I
know. No.
You know more about this stuff than I do, George. But anyway, I enjoy listening to you because you are so diverse in all the things that you know. And that is a compliment, my friend.
Well, thank you. Marshall, paint us a story. Paint us a picture with this story that I'm going to ask you to give us here of what you think happened nearly 500,000 years ago. Maybe even take it back, and this is where it's going to have to be speculation on your part. But, Adam the Missing Link is such a great story in your book. I might as well let your mind run wild tonight.
Okay.
I want you to speculate on the planetary system that these people may have come from, whether it's Sitchin's theory or not, and then tell me what you think they saw. Why did they come here? What did they decide to do?
Okay, their planet was in trouble. According to the records that the translations give us, their atmosphere had a hole in it, kind of like our ozone leak, and they were losing their heat. Now, their planet, according to the records, orbits the sun every 3,600 years. It's in our solar system, and because it goes so far out, it gets very cold. Well, what protected them was their atmosphere, and the atmosphere is just like ours. If you go outside of our atmosphere, George, it's very cold. So even though we're close to the sun, it's still very cold out there. In order to salvage they tried everything according to the records, and the only planet in the solar system that had gold was Earth. They determined that by a survey. I don't know how they did that, but their story is that they had to come here to get gold and send the gold back to Nibiru, which was their home planet, and powder it into flakes and throw it up into the atmosphere, and it closes up the hole, which is an interesting concept for us to put in the back of our hat in case we ever really start to lose our atmosphere. Gold apparently reflects. Our space our astronauts have gold shields on their faces.
That's right. That's right.
Anyway, so the story is that they needed gold. We were the only planet that had it, and so they sent a mining expedition here to take our gold and ship it back to their planet to save their atmosphere and save their homeland.
And I guess they had the kind of technology to know we had the gold, right?
That's right. I mean, how they did that, I can't tell you. I couldn't even speculate on that. But they were able to run a survey of all the planets that were in the same solar system that they were. By the way, they were a rogue planet, according to the story of Enuma Elish, which they recorded for us. Their planet was captured by Neptune's gravitational pull. It was floating out in space. And
it's still out there somewhere, right?
Well, it's back in. It was once it got into our solar system, it came down and ran around the sun and went back out. And it's been doing that every 3,600 years.
Exactly. And I can't wait to get into some of the artifacts and evidence that you talk about in your work, too. But
right.
But so they come here to look for gold. And originally, I assume they're doing it themselves, right? Or did they already have a plan?
Absolutely. No, they were doing it for a long time and apparently very good at it and got into Africa. They got into the African gold vein, which I think is quite deep. Might be as much as...
And again, they probably had the technology to know exactly where it was.
Exactly. And they didn't survey the whole planet. They would have found it elsewhere, but yeah. they found it from... Well, they landed, I think, in the records say, in the Persian Gulf, which is where their spaceship came down. And from there, they went on shore, which became... Sumar or Mesopotamia. That's today is Iraq. Is what we call.
Isn't that incredible? Yeah.
Yeah, and most of these treasures that we've found, George, have been in the sands of Iraq. In these buried libraries of these rich kings many thousands of years ago.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was a cradle. You know how they talk about the cradle of civilization. Well, this is where, based on your theory and Sitchin's, this is where the genetic alterating occurred.
That's right. So, well, actually, no. The first cloning operation happened in Africa.
Okay.
Southeast Africa, near the gold mines, because their idea was that they got to a point where they needed a primitive worker to do the mining because their guys were getting a little tired of doing it. And they took, one of the genetic engineers took the local Homo erectus and experimented and finally produced Homo sapiens, and they called him Adam.
And Homo erectus, I guess, they were not smart enough or controllable enough to do what they needed to do with the gold, right?
You couldn't talk to him. You couldn't communicate with him. That was the problem. They needed some like Homo erectus, but community you could do what you wanted to do. Tell them what to do, and they'd do it.
And when they then started to genetically alter Homo erectus, is that how we found Adam? He was the first?
He was the first, and there's a book that Sitchin wrote called The Lost Book of Enki.
Yes.
Terrific book. He translated...
and I think that's his last book, right?
No, he's written several books since
Did he do another one? Okay.
Yeah, but this was, what to me, was his most outstanding because it's direct translations of tablets that he found. This story is the story of how they came here and a lot of the information, but the chapter 6, or tablet number 6, which it is, tablet 6 tells the story of all the mistakes they made before they finally got Adam. As they were trying various combinations of cloning that didn't work.
It must have been like the island of Dr. Moreau
Yeah, exactly.
with some of their mistakes.
Yeah, mistakes. I don't know.
Four-arm people and three heads and all kinds of things.
All that. But, one of the interesting things that happened just recently, as I reread it, the thing that finally worked, they were mixing up they took the egg from the female Homo erectus, and they implanted their DNA, the Anunnaki's DNA, into the egg, and then planted that egg into the female Anunnaki birth mothers.
Oh, okay. All right.
So it's kind of like intro.
Did they still go through a 9-month gestation period?
Right. But it wasn't working until they mixed it. They were always mixing it in crystal containers. They mixed it in a clay pot. Now get this. And I guess some of the clay got mixed in with the mixture, and that worked. And that's where this story about we came from the earth.
From dust to dust.
Dust to dust, exactly, George.
Amazing.
And now, today, I've read several reports of people who are doing these transplanting, and they're using dirt. They're using, and it's working. It's working better. Now, I don't know why, but I don't know if they found out from these ancient tablets that was what is a good thing to do. But
how many of us did they make, Marshall? Hundreds? Thousands?
Thousands. And then, one of the interesting things, George, is that the clones can't reproduce. In other words, they made a female for Adam, but they couldn't mate because they were genetically engineered. So they had to go through another operation to make Eve fertile so that Adam could have children with her. And in the Bible, the story of Adam's rib, I think, is very parallel to this story. Yeah. It's where woman came from, but where woman who was fertile came
Maybe they took cells from his rib or something.
They probably took marrow. I don't know. They go into details. And I'm just, looking for the facts. And as much as I can gather that supports. The book, I took 12 different things here on Earth that I said would help support this. If I could.
You don't think, though, that the Anunnaki, that their existence is to travel to planetary systems and basically create, genetically alter what's there and try to create
George,
people?
They had a problem with that. They had something like a prime directive in that they weren't allowed to alter species. And the way they got around it was they said, we're not going to create a new species. It's already here. We're just going to put our mark on it. In other words, they took the Homo erectus and they altered it and produced us. It was not it was a bicameral production, but they had to deal with this, not fooling around, with making new species.
When we come back, Marshall, tell us what happened to the Anunnaki. They simply disappeared, or are they still here? And then later on, we will talk about the Giza Pyramids, the Nazca Lines in Peru, on Coast to Coast AM. Well, sign up for the free Coast Zone newsletter. Just go to coasttocoastam.com, click the link there that you'll see on the homepage, fill out the information, and voila, you'll start getting the Coast Zone newsletter delivered to your computer. It's an email newsletter, and you'll love it. Great stories about Coast to Coast, information about upcoming shows, and if you missed a show or two, you'll have past information as well. And sometime next week, those of you who are getting the Coast Zone newsletter, the free newsletter, and it will always be free, you're going to get a peek, a glimpse of the brand new coasttocoastam.com website. So make sure you subscribe to the Coast Zone newsletter. We're with Marshall Klarfeld, his book, Adam the Missing Link. Marshall, how long did they stay here on the planet? And then where did they go? Why did they leave?
Well, that's a good question, George. I'm not sure that all of them did leave, but the records seem to indicate around 1200 BC they started to phase off because the way you analyze it, the way I analyzed it, was they started teaching humans, us, how to be self-sufficient, how to learn some of the things that they knew, so that we don't hear about them after that period of time. And, of course, you may recall there was this great calamity that happened around 2000 BC, where they got into it between their various warring factions and produced a huge calamity, which we can talk about later.
Sure.
But I think that they may have gone back to their home planet. That's probably what happened, but there's no evidence. We don't, we've never had the cycle of seeing it. In recent recorded history, it hasn't appeared because it takes 3,600 years. And there's lots of people who tried to forecast when is the next appearance of Nibiru. And even I have done some of that. And it looks like it might be 300 years off in my guesstimation, but that's just a guess.
Do we look like them?
Oh, we are them.
We are them. I almost to the T.
That's the thing that you can say, look at you, look at me. We are descendants of the Anunnaki. We have their genes. If you look at the genome that was done on the human beings about 2001, I believe, they found that we had about 25,000 genes. But in that mix, there were 223 that were alien. They didn't know where they came from. And that kind of opens the boxes to what our history is. That we, according to the story, we are bicameral. In other words, we were cloned from Homo erectus into Homo sapiens. And we have no fossil remains of any species in between us, George. In other words, my missing link is what happened to all the species that evolved to produce us.
Yeah. We just jump-started. We were here, all of us.
That's a good phrase. We got jump-started by the Anunnaki as a species 250,000 years ago. And all the evidence appears that they were around, and before they phased off the planet, if they did, totally, they taught mathematics, astronomy, astrology, all the things that they knew that we would need. And then, of course, since we do have their genes, George, it makes sense that we've evolved to the technical edges of where they were.
We're getting really close, I think.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Now, are there any conflicts between these theories and what people read, what we read in the Bible?
Well, that's a good question, George. I mean, I read the Bible. I got into this search for who we were by being a biblical scholar. Okay. And then I got a highly technical education at Caltech, and I started to see similarities between what I was learning and what was being I read in the Bible. And I said to myself, whoa, how did they get so smart, whoever wrote the Bible? So I think I don't have any problem with faith. I'm a faith person. I believe in a creator of all. In other words, I've kind of adopted their God because I believe that, an interesting thing. I asked Linus Pauling, do you believe in God? And he said, Clarfeld, our discipline is to explain everything that's going on in the universe back to the beginning, which is the Big Bang. If you were to ask me what there was a millisecond before the Big Bang, we cannot answer that question. If you wish to believe in God, please do, because we don't know what there was just before the Big Bang.
Now, the talk in Genesis, fallen angels, the Nephilim.
The Nephilim, yeah, there they go. Right.
Are we, or are we being taught the Anunnaki, but in a different phrase, a different way?
I think so. I think, I take the word Nephilim, those who came from heaven to earth, as being the Anunnaki.
Or were there other races of ETs that came here?
I think so. I can't imagine that the Anunnaki were the only ones visiting Earth. In fact, with all the UFO activity over the last 40, 50 years, we must be something like a 7-Eleven.
Well, I think that though there must be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of civilizations throughout this universe.
I believe that.
I would guess that populated planets are few and far between when you look at how many are out there. And that means that planets like Earth must be seen as a gem, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you know, I remember Orson Welles' program, The Invasion from Mars. He had people on the East Coast going out of their gourds because it sounded so real, and everybody was believing it. Well, here come the Martians, and they're bad, you know, and they're going to...
The War of the Worlds.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think here's a thought I've had in the years that I've been working with this subject, is that the destiny of this planet is determined by the physics of our sun. When the sun goes bye-bye, we go with it. And that's supposedly going to happen maybe 5 billion years from now, according to the predictions that I've been able to research. So the question is, how will humanity survive if its planet's gone? And my answer is, we got to find Earth 2 and populate it. Well,
Absolutely.
How do you find Earth 2? Well, you go out in the solar system like some other folks have been doing, and you look around for green planets that you could occupy.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the proof behind this, proof behind these theories, and then we'll start moving outside of this region into some of the other areas, Egypt, the Easter Island statues, Nazca lines, and places like that. But what's out there? Because in your book, Adam, the Missing Link, you do have some illustrations, you do have photographs, you do talk about artifacts. Tell me about all these.
Well, I was trying to build a case, a factual case that there was evidence to prove that this planet was occupied by an advanced civilization, or whatever they called themselves. What is the proof? I put together in my book, as you said, George, 12 things that I think are enough evidence to say conclusively they were here. And the messages, that are buried in the pyramids and in Stonehenge and in many other artifacts that I point to in the book, gives you at least it gave me a very strong feeling that this civilization was here, and if they wanted to call themselves the Anunnaki, fine. But there were things that we couldn't do. There's many things like the Baalbek, Lebanon stones. Those are a mind blower.
They're huge
for an engineer. They just, I said, how did they do that? Who did this? How was that done? And I came to the realization that it had to be done by some super advanced civilization that was technically way up ahead of anybody going around at that time. The Romans sure didn't do it.
The theories that Sitchin uses are based on Sumerian tablets that he has interpreted. There are others who don't agree with. Mike Kaiser, for example, doesn't believe in his theory.
Right.
How do we know Sitchin's correct? How do we know Marshall Clarfeld is correct?
Well, you don't. The bottom line is you got to prove it to yourself. And the only way you can prove it to yourself is to examine the physical evidence that we present. Like in my book, I present 12 things that collectively speak and shout they were here.
Can we quickly go through these 12? Just kind of highlight them for me?
Sure.
Okay. 12 pieces of evidence that you, and some of this is physical? Or
well, most of it's physical.
Okay.
I felt that you needed to connect the dots. And the first one was Stonehenge. I've got a complete analysis of that. The second one was the landing platform at Baalbek, Lebanon that I...
All right.
And they talk about it as a place where they came up and down. That was their landing site. And they put those stones there so they could launch off of that corner also. Okay, number 3. By the way, they left one of those monsters in the quarry where they got the other 3. So you get...
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. There's a picture on page 26 of my book showing 2 little people standing next to this humongous...
Oh, they are huge. They are. Aren't they bigger than the pyramid blocks? I think they are.
Oh, gosh, yeah. They weigh 1,200 tons, George.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, they're a little bigger.
Okay, then number 3 is the Giza pyramids.
Okay.
I have many pages on that because that, to me, was a classic. We can get into some of this later, but
yeah, we'll go through each one. But
number 4 is Easter Island statues.
Okay.
And
5 is
5. Oops.
Gee, Marshall, you mean you don't have this all memorized?
I go to my index, George. That's it. All right.
I don't blame you.
5 are the walls, the Cyclopean walls. The Peru, those things. And then 6 is the New World pyramids. And 7 is the Crystal Skull.
Uh-huh.
Mitchell Hedges' Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
The Nazca Lines.
Yeah.
The Winged Pilot. The life-size, number 10 is the life-size statue of Ishtar.
Mm-hmm.
And the number 11 is the relief in the Egyptian temple that shows the flying vehicles. In other words, there were flying vehicles that were portrayed by somebody chiseling up in the roof of that temple.
Okay. All right.
And then number 12 is the cylinder seals. And the cylinder seals, I think, are the most incredible invention that they gave us. It's kind of like a storage information device, because when you roll the cylinder seal over wet clay, it gives you a positive picture story.
Right. It's like a negative on the
and the
tablet.
Cylinders that they used were made out of a stone that has the hardness of steel, and the steel was engraved in the negative. I mean, it's a cute trick that they did, but they left information. You know, these were like, you know, this is what we did, this is how we did it, and you piece those together. The British Museum is filled with cuneiform tablets and cylinder seals that make this story have authenticity.
All right, let's move to some of these areas.
Okay.
And have you talk about it for the next hour as well. We'll take phone calls in the last hour with you, Marshall.
Okay.
Stonehenge. As a matter of fact, there was a report that just came out a few months ago that also thought that it may be a place of healing for people. There may be some energy there. But tell me why you believe that area was developed by the Anunnaki.
Okay. Before there were any stones at Stonehenge, it was a giant circle with a trench, and in the trench was white chalk. There's a lot of chalk in that part of England. And there were 56 holes in the ground that were 3-foot diameter, made out of chalk. So here you had an object on the ground that had this circle of white chalks, and then these 56 holes. Well, in 1960, CBS did a computer analysis of these Aubrey holes. Nobody could figure out what 56 meant. So they did this analysis, and lo and behold, they discovered that at this geographic location, in a sequence of every 19 years, 19 years, and 18 years, there's an eclipse of the moon. So if you took the black stone and moved it around, covering up the white holes, Aubrey holes, in succession with the moon's cycle, you can predict. It was a computer predicting the eclipses of the moon. Okay, so phase 1 went into phase 2, where they brought the stones in and they started clocking the sun. Now, first we had a moon computer, and then the second thing they did was they put the stones up, which track the summer solstice and the winter solstice. And these stones were moved from 200 miles away, George, and they're humongous.
Yeah.
I mean, you tell me that the tribes on the Salisbury Plain there were capable of moving these stones, digging holes, tilting them up, and dropping them perfectly into the depth of these holes, so that when you were finished, you have a circle of lentils on the top.
Now, did they build this because they needed it, or were they doing this for us?
That's a good question, George. I wish I knew the answer. I would say that they were showing us what they knew. In other words, by first doing the moon computer, that's a very, very sophisticated operation.
Absolutely.
And that was like 3000 BC. People who could predict the eclipse of the moon with a computer-like device. That was, and also, I have a feeling, this is my own theory, that because it was white chalk holes and white chalk trench, it was some kind of a navigational. They had problems coming in to our planet from outer space, and then orbiting around the equator. At that time there was no infrastructure to guide them. In other words, our precision that we do with the shuttles is amazing, but we have all this ground technology.
Telemetry. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, they didn't have any of that. So maybe they built this two-purpose Stonehenge Phase 1, which was eclipse of the moon, but also a navigational beacon. Later on, I know they made beacons out of the pyramids, and they made beacons out of the Easter Island, and I can explain that later. But I would say that the Stonehenge was just kind of like the first temple. Now, if you look at the construction, George, from an engineering point of view, uprights connected by a lintel on the top that are pinned. There were pins on the top of the stone that held the lintels in place, and they went around in this circle at the top of the uprights. You look at the Egyptian temples, they're all built that way.
Yeah.
They're vertical pillars with lintels on the top that hold them together, and they're square, they're not circular. This is an incredible feat of engineering to make a circular temple like that. So, to answer your question, I really don't know, but if I were to guess, they were doing it for themselves.
All right, we'll get into some of the other 11 next hour. Where was their laboratory for the genetic manipulation? Was it their craft? Did
they
live?
They claimed, or in the translations, it says that Enki had a laboratory down in the mining area, Abzu, they called it, and he did it there. Then he moved. He could do it any place, and they apparently had a way of transferring their technology to different places by recording it in what they called MEs. And the MEs are the biggest mystery. I haven't really figured totally out yet. But there were small wafer-like devices that had tremendous information stored in them, and
almost like chips.
Chips, like a computer chip. And one night I had this dream that one of the characters, I always dream about the characters in my book, particularly Ishtar. She's my favorite. She's such a beauty. Took one of those little wafers out and squeezed it against the wall. Squeezed it, and a picture came out of it and was readable on the wall.
All right, we'll be back. We'll talk more about some of these artifacts on Coast to Coast AM. And tonight we're talking about Adam the Missing Link with our guest Marshall Klarfeld. And he's next with us on Coast to Coast AM. Marshall, so many of these artifacts left behind. Let's get into the one in Lebanon then at Baalbek, which I've always believed to be a very unusual series of structures. Never quite able to figure out, Marshall, why it was built until theories like yours came around. Tell us about this one.
Okay, the landing platform, according to the literature, is the place where they launched their rockets and came back down. And it was the key to their space system. They had to have a central command, and they had to have a target that they could keep repeating and come back down to. So the thing is over 5 million square feet, George. It's one of the hugest constructions.
Huge, yeah.
Huge. And the Romans, it's 1,500 miles from Rome, built the largest temple to their god Jupiter in the entire empire. Now, it had to be a pretty sacred, or extraordinarily sacred location for them to do that, because the logistics of the 1,500-mile distance from the center of their empire.
Marshall, are there any burn marks on it? You know,
I thought about that the other night, George. I wish I could go there, but they're covered up. In other words, the corner, if you go to Cape Canaveral...
And by the way, I'm assuming a propulsion system of landing, but you know what? If it's electromagnetic, let's say, there were no burn marks. There were, the craft just merely just came right in and just landed.
But my analysis is the reason they took those 3 humongous stones and stuck them in the northwest corner of that situation was they had to push against something when they launched. If you go to Canaveral, you'll see tons and tons of concrete underneath the launch pad to push on. It's kind of a physics thing. In order to get up in the air from Earth, you just can't go blow it in the sand. Put something
That's
under
true.
it. Now, these stones are the most marvelous part about this whole platform. Each of them, I think, weighs over 1,200 tons. Now, for your audience, visualize 3 747s fully loaded and lifted. That's what 1,200 tons is. And they're lifted up 36 feet in the air. And they were taken from the quarry, which was 2 miles away, transported to this corner, lifted 36 feet in the air, and then placed end to end without any mortar. A feat that we would be very challenged today to accomplish.
Now, other than a landing pad,
Yes.
is there any other reason why this thing would be built?
It was in the...
I mean, what could it have been used for?
Its original purpose, they said, was to... and they kept it hidden from everybody because it was in the middle of the cedar forest, which is in Lebanon. And they cleared this clearing and leveled it out and built a place where they could do their launching and landings in secret. So for what other purpose after they...
I mean, no, if it was not built by the Anunnaki,
Yes.
Let's say it was built by humans, Romans, who knows?
No.
If it was, I don't think it was, but if it was, what would they have used it for?
Yeah.
There's nothing there, is there?
Absolutely good question. And, George, this apparently was built before the Great Flood. Interesting information sidebar. And it survived the Great Flood. It's one of the few things on Earth that was able to come out of the mud and gunk and forces of the flood. So that's referred to in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is also in the book. But these stones are unique, and I have done some additional research, and I found a stone that was half as big, which is still pretty big, under the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Now, there's an interesting thing.
It sure is.
The Solomon's Temple, or whatever came after that, why this big stone got down there, they haven't figured that out yet. But I think that in the time the Anunnaki were operating their spaceport, they had to have a central command, and I think it was in Jerusalem. If you look at the map, you can see how this all lays out.
And the platform's still there, obviously.
It's still there. In fact, it's being used, George, by Hezbollah right now.
To launch?
No, as a fortress. They might be launching into Israel from there. I don't know.
Jeez. That's unbelievable. To imagine that extraterrestrials may have used it as landing pads, and now it's being used for conflict.
Yes. And in the book, I'm able to give readers good pictures, close-ups of the stones, close-ups of the construction and how it operated, and then how they found it. If you drew a line between the twin snow-peaked mountains of Ararat in Turkey and the, at that time, polished and shiny pyramids at Giza, the Baalbek platform lands right in the middle of it. So they could navigate between that. It's
all right, now let's move on to Giza.
Okay.
We've got, I've talked over the last couple of weeks, I've talked about the pyramids. I've had several guests, including Zahi Hawass, head of Egypt's Antiquities. Right. But let's talk about the E.T. connection, because he didn't want to talk about it.
No, I know.
Some others I've had on just, haven't. I've had others that have. But let's get your take on the Giza pyramids and what you think they built them for, if they did build them.
Well, I took the other approach, George. I said the Egyptians couldn't have built them.
Could not.
Exactly. I mean, this is technically a feat that's impossible with the tools that they had. Their tools were copper and bronze, and this is granite we're talking about. And just for instance, take the foundation of the three pyramids at Giza. They leveled a mountaintop of granite to plus or minus a half-inch spec over 27 acres. Egyptians never could have done that. They don't have the tools to cut granite. Granite is a lot harder than copper or bronze. And then I get into the casing stones, which I think is one of the remarkable features of this. They wanted something that would reflect sunlight as a beacon, a navigational beacon. and they put on the kind of the outside of both pyramids, both the big pyramids, these casing stones, which are a marvel. They were polished to within 1/100th of an inch on all 6 sides, and then laid up together and glued. Here's something a lot of people don't know. Those casing stones were glued in the joints, and it's a feat that is, it was almost impossible to contemplate it being done, but they achieved. When it was finished, they had this reflective surface that shot the sunlight to the horizon. It was just beautiful.
So you don't believe these were king's tombs and that they were probably built way earlier than they say?
Yeah, maybe 10,000 years ago or something like that. The proof of the casing stone is that the one snow-capped pyramid that's left there still has casing stones glued to its peak. That's why it's white up there. They haven't come down. Normally they'd fall down if they were just using gravity, but they're glued together. And I found a quote from a legendary Egyptologist. The guy named is Sir William Flinders Petrie. He expressed his astonishment at this feat by writing, "Merely to place such stones in exact contact would be careful work, but to do so with cement in the joint seems almost impossible. It is to be compared with the finest optician's work on a scale of acres."
Jeez.
I mean, this is an engineering feat that the Egyptians never could have done. The Anunnaki pulled it off, and it was amazing.
But why? Why did they build them?
They said, they explained why they built them. They had to have twin peaks here to match the twin peaks in Mount Ararat and use a line between them that they could see.
Navigation, then.
Navigation, you're right, George. And now here's an interesting thing. 12 hours a day the sun is okay there, but then 12 hours it isn't. And guess what's exactly 12 hours west of the pyramids? Easter Island.
Yeah.
In the middle of nowhere.
Which is where we go next.
Okay.
All right.
And these statues are kind of images of the Anunnaki. They have huge ears, long ears, and beards, and big noses. From what we've been able to see from the cylinder seals, that's kind of what they look like. And by putting their heads up in the sky, and they had polished coral eyes in these statues, and the rim went around the island. The statues are on the perimeter of the island, and all faced east, and looking up with these they're like Boy Scout mirrors. And they worked as another beacon. It lit up when the pyramids went dark. So that was my interpretation of why they built that.
All right, and then let's move on to the walls of Peru, which I'm not really familiar with. I haven't done a lot of work on that.
Okay. Most of the pictures I illustrate in the book show the walls that are incredible, and they have kind of a strange feature, which I got curious about, and they're called projections. At the bottom of each stone, there's 2 little projections that stick out. And you wonder, well, why did they leave those out? If they built this beautiful wall with such close-fitting stones, why wouldn't they have, either gotten rid of these things or how did they get there or whatever? Anyway, my observation about how that was done is that these stones that have those objects on them are man-made or Anunnaki-made. They're manufactured by injection molding. And I've seen evidence of molding signs in stones that shouldn't be there. In other words, a natural stone wouldn't have a board imprint in it. And all these little injection are left over. In other words, when they did the molding, they had to have some way to push this artificial stone in there, and they just never bothered to chop them off. Now, what triggered this, George, was that there's a guy who studied the casing stones I told you about on the pyramid. Mm-hmm. His name is Joseph de Virowitz. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He's a Frenchman. Did an analysis of the casing stones and declared that they were artificially made. that they were so perfect that the composition of the stone didn't match any quarries within 600 miles of the pyramids.
Jeez, another mystery.
Well, I mean, he's a guy that came up with something that I think is worth following. If this is a thing in Inca, the Inca walls, which looks to me like they were made, some of them, ones that have these little protrusions left on them, those perfect fitting stones just doesn't seem like you could make them that way. You can't even get a credit card in the joint there.
All right, and New World pyramids, you're talking about pyramids that you could find in Central and South America and places like that?
Yes. And the Olmecs are the ones that I think were involved in that, and also I think the son of one of the Anunnaki came over. They expelled him for some reason, and he said, "I'm going to do it better. I'm going to build them better than we did in Egypt." And he produced these pyramids with the stairway on the outside, and the ones that are in Mexico City or near Mexico City have the same pattern as the three in Giza. In other words, there's a kind of a pattern of the Orion belt stars, two together and then one offset. Well, that exists in those pyramids, so it kind of gives me some belief that they could have been the same thing. And what the story of the Orion belt is yet to be solved.
All right, now we're getting into some other exciting areas. The crystal skulls.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me, do you believe the crystal skulls were made by the Anunnaki? The authentic ones. Now, there's a lot of
the
junk
Mitchell
out there.
Hedges. The only one I have any truck with is the Mitchell Hedges because it's so perfect. And when it itself was tested by Hewlett-Packard in their labs, and they said it shouldn't exist. There are no marks on it. There's no way it could have been made. It's fashioned against the grain of the crystal.
They couldn't have chipped away at it, that's for sure.
They didn't touch
or
it. Or
grind it.
No. So this, to me, is a interesting phenomenon, and because it's the same material as we use in our computers, I think it may contain some information, George, if we could just figure out how to get it out of it.
How to use it, exactly.
Yeah, right.
And there could be another piece that goes with it,
Right. Well,
maybe a body. You just put the head on top of it or something.
Right. So I have that in the book, and then we get to the Nazca line.
Yes, something that Eric von Daniken.
Yes. Well, when I wrote the book, I suspected one day I would find out, I would do some research, and I would try to understand why it was done and what it means. And just recently, a little over a month ago, I came up with a new theory that it is one gigantic time capsule. And
Nazca lines, for people who don't know what they are, a series of drawings on the earth, on the ground, that you really can only see from way above, right?
That's right. And
there's spiders, all kinds of things, monkeys.
It was done. No, they knew that one day we would obtain flight, and we would fly over this thing and see it, because that's the only way you can read it.
Okay, now, one argument is they were just humans who made them for the gods to see. Okay, all right, so let's put that out there.
All right. I believe that the one object on the plateau is a spider that the Indians couldn't have done. The reason I say that is that it's the rarest spider in the world, and it doesn't exist in that part of the world. It's 900 miles away in the Amazon jungle under the leaves where you hardly would find it. It's the rarest spider that they know of. So putting that spider on the plateau is an indication that they knew about it and nobody else could have done it. So I think that just cancels out the Indians. I hate to do that, but...
okay. So what were they? Were they visual what?
Okay. They were like we do. We bury time capsules with things that we know, and we want the future to know that we knew them. Okay, what these are all the local animals and birds that existed at the time they did this. Now, they did this maybe more than 3,000 years ago. And the most complex design on that plateau is the monkey. Now, get this. The monkey has 9 fingers. and his tail has got circles that look like orbits. And I think they were trying to tell us that they knew that there were 9 planets in our solar system, and those were the orbits in the tail. And the hands of the monkey, the 9-fingered monkey, are inside the Great Pyramid at Giza. There's a sketch that shows the pyramids. And attached to that are these parallel lines, which are so precision. It's the only precision part on the plateau, and I can explain how they did this, or how I think they did it. But I think it touches on the big pyramid where the monkey has his hands in, and I think it maybe indicates that the casing stones, because there's 8 surfaces. The 2 pyramids that had the casing stones on them had covered all 4 sides. So you had 8.
Well, you know what's amazing too, Marshall, is they don't seem to have weathered away.
Okay.
They don't seem to have moved. I mean,
well,
they're there.
the plateau is about 12,000 feet, I think, George, and it's 37 miles long and 1 mile wide, and the size of each of these drawings is humongous. I mean, like 2 football fields is the size of it. And the way it was created was there's little rocks that cover this plateau, and it doesn't rain there and the wind doesn't blow, so they can last for a long time. And you take and you separate the rocks as you draw your line away from the surface underneath it, and it's sand. So it shows up brilliantly in contrast to the rocky surface. And the other interesting thing about every one of these drawings is that the stylus that made them never leaves the plateau. In other words, it's a continuous line. If you look at the drawings and you see how they made them, no line ever crosses itself. It just forms the object of the bird, and then it comes out. And you say to yourself, well, that's pretty special. Somebody that thought about designing an art form that had one continuous stroke. Now, the next question is, how'd they make it from up above?
Let's come back and talk a little bit more about the Nazca lines, and we'll talk about the winged pilot, flying vehicles, and those cylinder seals, and some other fascinating subjects with Marshall Clarfeld, author of Adam the Missing Link on Coast to Coast AM. Next hour, we'll open up the phone lines for Marshall Clarfeld. Have you subscribed yet to the After Dark magazine? Well, do so or renew, and you'll get 2 free CDs, classic interviews with Malachi Martin that Art did a long time ago. They're yours, a gift, when you subscribe to After Dark magazine by calling 1-888-727-5505, or you can go online at coasttocoastam.com. There's some great photographs of the Nazca lines up there under the feature article at coasttocoastam.com. If you want to go take a look at those, if you have not seen them, they are remarkable. And if you have looked at them over the years, you know what, Marshall? You can keep looking at them all the time. They're still fascinating to look at, aren't they?
Yes, they are. They are works of art, I think. And there's one other part of the plateau that I mention in my new theory, and I think you'll recognize this. We sent our own time capsule out into space in Pioneer 10 and 11 and Voyager 1 and 2 because we gave them, and a lot of people were upset that we did this, George, because we showed where we were.
Yeah, it was like a roadmap to Earth.
Yeah, right, exactly. Now, that starburst of pulsars, it's 14 pulsars coming out of a central location, is replicated on the plateau at Nazca. And there are 3 such devices that are easily recognizable as where they came from. In other words, if we sent this message out into space to say to anybody that would find those capsules that this is where we were, this is what we look like, and this is our solar system, they have left on the plane here, I feel, a similar map showing where they came from. And it is the belt of Orion again, a configuration. Plus, you got to figure out the length of the lines and what they mean as far as their location goes. I am astounded that people haven't picked up on this before, George, because the thing is a huge time capsule of what the Anunnaki were up to, and were able to tell what they knew about our 9 planets in our solar system, the pyramids at Giza, the spider, which nobody else would ever know about, and the lines showing where they came from.
Good work. The winged pilot.
Okay. wing pilot is a thing people have seen and then just, didn't know what it was. It shows a guy with a big beard and a wing, a huge wing that he's sitting in the middle of, and there's a circle that he's holding in his hand, and there's 2 feet that come out of the bottom of it. And on page 52 in my book, I show several demonstrations of what this could be. It looks like an airplane. This guy is flying an airplane. And that was obviously what they wanted to imply to us, and that's what I call, it's a sculpture that you can find all over the Middle East, this guy on this wing.
Well, you know what? When you look at some of the things that they've got there, it is bizarre. I don't know if you've seen the tablets of Egypt from Abydos.
Yes, that's exactly. That is item number 11.
Okay, that's in the flying vehicles. I know. Go ahead. Talk about that.
Okay.
And then we'll get the Ishtar.
Okay. They uncovered this temple. It's a 3,000-year-old Egyptian temple, and up in the ceiling, they found a carving which shows a flying, looks like a space vehicle. There's a helicopter, and there's also a boat with a snorkel on it. Now, the boat with the snorkel on it, to me, was the survival vehicle used by Enki to save humanity during the Great Flood. It was not an ark. It did not float on top because they knew it was going to be a tsunami. And when a tsunami comes, nothing floating on the surface is going to survive. It has to be a submarine-type design. So that was the depiction, and there's a glider down there, too.
And, the helicopter, to me, that's the most fascinating.
Yeah.
Clearly a helicopter. Clearly.
George, what was he looking at when he was chiseling that thing?
Yeah, exactly. And, I asked Zahi Hawass if he knew about that, this tablet,
yes.
this etching.
Yes.
And he said he didn't know about it.
He didn't know about it. Well, probably didn't want to know about it. Look, there's a vested interest in Egypt to keep Egyptian lore and the pyramids part of their tourist trade. And I don't blame them for, laying claim to it. I just don't think it's true.
Let's talk about Ishtar for a moment. Babylonian myth talks about Ishtar as well. Go ahead.
Yeah. She's my most fascinating character. The statue they found 4,000 years ago, they uncovered it. It's a life-size, perfectly intact, showing her with her flying helmet on and this tube going down the back of her gown, which nobody's ever figured out what the tube was. But in all the literature that I have on Ishtar, she did a lot of flying around. She had whirlwinds, which is the helicopter. They call them whirlwinds. And she was able to go in shuttlecraft. And they needed these devices in order to get up into the atmosphere or out of the atmosphere. And so I think that this is a life-size sculpture of a real Anunnaki princess, Ishtar.
And how many females do you think they brought to this planet? Now, some for breeding, as you said.
Yeah, well, each one was married, each of the Anunnaki leaders. And it's interesting, their grand council of 12.
Well, they bring their families here?
They made families here, George. They were young when they came here. I mean, in their scheme of things, they were young, and they brought wives with them.
But they were on assignment then, weren't they? They were like young astronauts.
Yes. Like we're going to do, one of the interesting things we have to contemplate is how we're going to get to the distant planets when it might take 500 years.
Right.
We got to build astronauts that can survive 500 years, George. And that's a task in itself. But I think
the only way you can do that is breed them.
Well, that's one way. The fact that there was an interesting thing on the television the other night. I watched how to have sex in space. It's hard because when you push on somebody, they go away. And
Marshall.
Good
thing this is late night, huh?
Yes, right. But it's one of the things they got to confront if they're going to go on these long trips.
Marshall, they go away here too. Believe me.
I know.
One way or another, they always go away.
Okay.
Let's talk about the cylinder seals, which you touched on.
Yes, I think they were the most magnificent accomplishment of this space-age technology the Anunnaki left us, and they left it. They used hematite, which is a stone that you can look it up in the hardness tables. It's as strong as steel, as hard as steel. And to polish it and then to engrave it in the negative to give us these beautiful pictures that were such detail is beyond the pale. There were no technology that I've been able to find in the Mesopotamian era thousands of years ago that was capable of creating these little cylinder seals. They had to be done by some advanced technology, just because of the hardness and the quality of the engraving, and the fact that it lasts. Now, here's something, George, that's really interesting: storage of information. If you wanted to store information for 4,000 or 5,000 years with our current technology, you'd be hard pressed. Nothing we do lasts.
Unless you probably put it on a little disc.
Well, the CDs won't last. The CDs, in 1,000 years are destroyed.
Well, that's probably true, too. They'll disintegrate.
Yeah, they're right. So here they are. They've left us a device, which I call a storage information device, the cylinder seal, in which they're able to transfer information to us thousands and thousands of years over time. That's amazing. Here we have, the fact the one cylinder seal that I think is the most remarkable, it's in a German museum, shows 3 characters. We believe they're Anunnaki because they got long beards and big noses and high heel shoes. But in the left-hand corner of this cylinder seal is a complete replication to scale of our solar system.
That is amazing.
That, to me, is one of the most incredible accomplishments that was left to us. We could look at it and say, how'd they know?
How'd they know that? They didn't have telescopes. How'd they know?
Yeah, right.
All right. You mentioned a catastrophe, and before we get into that, let me also ask you about Atlantis. Any connection here with the Anunnaki?
Could be. I have not, I must admit, I'm not a scholar on Atlantis.
Okay.
So I can't
So you haven't tied those two together yet?
No, it's very possible, though, George. Very
All right.
possible.
Now, you talk about a catastrophe. Something happened.
Calamity.
A war, a battle.
Calamity.
What happened?
Well, I think it's 2024 BC, they had brought 7 atomic weapons with them when they came to Earth, and the younger generation got a hold of them, and they started going at each other. And you remember in your Bible the story of Sodom and Gomorrah?
Yes.
If you read that carefully, you could easily say that was an atomic explosion that destroyed those cities. And that's what happened. In other words, the elders couldn't control the youngers. The youngers went ahead and started shooting the atomic weapons. And what they created, the great calamity, was that the fallout, the radiation fallout that drifted from the Sinai desert, where this happened, Sodom and Gomorrah in the Sinai, went northeast, and it wiped out Sumer. It wiped out everything in its path. The only thing that survived was Babylon. And they called that the Great Calamity because they had, in effect, cut their foot off.
And isn't there some evidence that shows that deep within the sands of the desert,
yes,
they find glass?
Glass, yeah, exactly. The remains of what we had it in our desert when we did our first atomic testing out in Nevada. We left glass all over the place there. This crystallized as sand. And so the theory of the calamity is the story in the Bible. God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, but the destruction was just like an atomic bomb.
What about the flood, the Great Flood?
Okay. I love the Great Flood. That's one of my favorite stories, and I just finished with my wife writing a screenplay based on Gilgamesh, and the flood story is in the 11th tablet of Gilgamesh.
Okay, all right.
And I...
of 12 tablets, right?
There's 12 tablets, right. 12 tablets. So the 11th is the one in the British Museum, the one you always see, the kind of heart-shaped one, which has the story of the flood. And most people, when they discovered that story, they said, how could this be? This is before the Bible. And it's the same story. anyhow, my belief is that we were left the story of Gilgamesh to teach us certain things, and we've written into the screenplay the story in its entirety, not entirety, but in maximum part of it, to be realistic. We hope it will open the gates. If we ever get this film produced,
the floodgates?
The floodgates will be open, George, because it tells the story of cloning. It tells the story of laser flying and the platform, the landing platform, rockets taking off.
And the flood was deliberate?
No,
the flood
happened. The flood happened, according to this story, by Nibiru came by at that time, and it pulled the Antarctic ice shelf into
now,
the
did this come by? Well, it must have been on one of its 3,600-year cycles.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I'm with you.
Okay.
And it just tore part of the planet apart.
It actually affected Nibiru, too.
Isn't Nibiru what some people have always claimed to call Planet X, that extra planet in the solar system?
Yeah, right. I've heard that.
Now, where do you think it could be now?
On its way back.
But whereabouts? I mean, how come we can't see it?
Well, it's pretty far away.
It's still out? I mean, the last time it came here must have been when?
Good question, George. Maybe the flood?
Well, let's see.
Do you know how long ago the flood was?
Flood was 5,000 years ago, I think.
I've heard 12. See, this is the problem. We haven't gotten good.
Well, if it's on a 3,600-year elliptical orbit, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we don't have a starting point from when the last time it was here, other than if we subtract 3,600 from 2008, for example, right?
Yes.
So it's about 1,600 BC, 2,000 BC, something like that. Maybe that's the last time it came by. Mm-hmm. That's on its it had to have, because I don't think from 1,600 BC to now there are no records of another planet showing up, right?
Right, that's right.
Okay, so it had to have been a little before that on its last trip in. So that means it could be getting pretty darn close now.
There are people that have written me, George, that say they've seen it. And I can't verify that.
Who are the people? Prominent people or just...
No. They're people who've read the book and who are trying to be helpful, and they have their own theories that it's this and that. And I've kind of dealt with what's here on Earth. I believe that the story is evidenced by the things that I've collected and pointed to in the book. And that's the way I want to leave it, because I think you can go off in all directions if you start pointing to Nibiru and saying this and saying that about it.
Why did they leave us genetically manipulated with this ability to hate and to keep wars and everything else, which could be exactly like they were?
We are exactly like they are, George. And the two things that in the literature that you read all the translations, and I'm sure you've done this, they were big in two areas. They were big in sex and they were big in war. And I look at us and I see similar characteristics.
Yeah, that's true.
Of Homo sapiens. Why not? We inherited their genes. And
now, are any of them still here?
Possible. I don't know how.
They're probably cells. The Illuminati.
Well, the sleeper cells. It's difficult to.
Well, I wouldn't say sleeper cells nowadays. Not those kind of sleeper cells.
Okay. Well, there are people who write me who say they are. And what am I going to say? Have you ever had that?
Oh, we get them calling here all the time.
Okay. So you know what I mean. I mean, you can't really prove anything.
Tell me about Adam the Missing Link. Where do you get it?
Okay, at my webpage. Currently, I'm working on other outlets soon, but right now the place is at www.adamthemissingLink.com. AdamTheMissingLink.com. That's my homepage.
It is a remarkable book, remarkable theory. Now, did you come upon this prior to Sitchin's work, or did he influence you? What really got you going?
Okay. As I said, I started at Caltech wondering and searching and trying to find answers.
Always looking for the answers.
Always looking for the answers, George. And when I picked up his book, his first book, The 12th Planet.
12th Planet.
Let's see, was it 10 years ago? I said, no, that kind of makes sense. And my wife said, well, prove it. And I said, well, I can't prove it. And she said, well, write a book. So I went on this research campaign to prove to myself that, there was validity to what Sitchin was saying. And what I found was all the proof, more proof than I could shake a stick at.
So you say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Sitchin's work is probably pretty accurate.
Yes, sir.
Man, okay, I tell you what, we're going to keep you around for phone calls next hour. You ready for that?
I am ready.
We've got Marshall Klarfeld with us. His book, Adam, the Missing Link. We'll open up the phone lines for you in just a moment. If you need to email me, that's very simple, too. That's George at coasttocoastam.com. Back in a moment with your calls on Coast to Coast AM.